I should have known better. I wanted it so badly I let it cloud my judgment. A guy like me would never get a girl like Marcia. Maybe in the movies, but not in real life. 3 years ago, Marcia started working in the office of SSA, that is, Safety and Security Affiliates. All the male employees were aware of her presence, mostly because she was a head taller than the other office girls. She wasn't smarter or more educated, but prettier and sexier. She didn't wear a wedding ring. My fascination with her quickly waned because I realized right away that she was totally out of my league. Hell, I wasn't even in any league. The only girls or women I'd ever had a relationship with were the ones that charged by the hour. I wasn't a virgin, but only because I'd worked up the courage to approach one of the less fierce-looking ladies of the night a few times. I actually found a few of the younger ones attractive, but all they wanted from me was my money. I couldn't even find a whore willing to spend one-on-one time with me if I didn't have money. I was raised by a single mom. I never met my father. I think it had something to do with the fact that I had no skills in dealing with women. My mother noticed this problem and tried very hard to help me. I took ballroom dancing classes with her for almost 2 years, but all I got out of it was the ability to dance. I still lacked confidence and courage to meet and socialize with the opposite sex. After I graduated high school, my mom got married and moved to Florida. We communicate a few times a year, but that's the only contact I've had with her. I liked working at SSA because I didn't have to interact with a lot of people. My days were spent checking fire and burglar alarm systems. The company was also heavily involved in installing security systems, which I was not interested in or attracted to at all. I had no social life after work. I enjoyed solving logic problems in the evenings, and I had a subscription to all the puzzle magazines. Although I had a home computer, I used it only as needed. Most of my meals were cooked in the microwave. I was a picky eater, and that's probably why I never weighed more than 150 pounds. Light for my height, but healthy. I didn't even have a suit because I never needed one. During the day, I wore my work dickies that the company supplied. I wore them even on weekends when I wasn't working. There was a landline phone in the house, and I had a company cell phone. The cell phone had unlimited minutes on it, so I used it when I called my mom. Contacts interfered with my eyes, so I always wore glasses. They weren't stylish, cool glasses, but rather practical, like a nerd would wear. In fact, I think I was a nerd. My interactions with people have always been within strictly defined limits. I didn't piss people off, but I didn't excite them either. I had no opinions worth sharing, and I was the world's worst joke teller. Now that you have an idea of what I have to offer the world, you can understand why I was surprised and stunned when Marcia Trent began casually chatting with me on a daily basis. I wasn't the only one who noticed her interest, and after a few weeks I began to be teased for it by the other office girls and some of the guys. I was flattered but embarrassed. I remember how it all started. "Dennis? Could you do me a little favor?" I was sitting at one of the tables in the break room eating lunch. I assumed she wanted to borrow a chair or ask me to move to another table. "Sure. Anything. Will you sit with me while I eat lunch?" All I could do was nod. After a few minutes, I was still trying to figure out what was going on. The other staff members noticed this, and a few quiet remarks were made. As befits my nature, I remained silent. I couldn't say anything that wouldn't make me look like an idiot, so I kept my mouth shut. "I hope you don't mind, but this is much easier for me." "How is it easier?" She seemed to be tidying herself up before answering, as if she were preparing to give a prepared speech. At that moment, I should have realized what was happening. When I come in for break or lunch, there are always other guys sitting with me. It makes me feel uncomfortable. They either make rude remarks or undress me with their stares. It's better to be with you. I didn't know if it was a compliment or an insult. I felt a little guilty. That's understandable. You are an extremely attractive woman, and any man who didn't fantasize about you would be dead. Are you fantasizing about me? A little, but I try not to show it. And you're doing a great job at it. That's why I need to sit with you. As long as I'm with you, the other guys won't bother me. It didn't make any sense. There was nothing intimidating about me. How could my presence discourage some lowlife from making remarks to her, or even peeping at her? I finished eating and sat in silence until she was done. No one bothered us, but we got a few unusual looks. When I got up to leave, she touched my arm. "Can you sit with me again tomorrow?" I smiled, nodded, and walked away embarrassed. After a week, we started socializing. It was hard for me, but it was much easier with her. I learned that she was a single mom with two girls who were in high school. Her work shift coincided with their school hours. She never mentioned her husband, ex-husband, or father. I was too stupid to ask. My mood lifted and I felt normal. A normal guy spending time with a gorgeous girl in a normal way. I didn't care that it was lunch in the company break room. Our contacts became more and more frequent, and I began to feel comfortable with her. At the same time, I felt uneasy. Something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. A few weeks later, she invited me to her house to meet the girls and have dinner. Brandy and Brenda were cute little girls, but a little too mannered for my taste. Kids under 10 are supposed to be rambunctious and noisy. I felt like I had spent the day with the Stepford kids. In fact, Marcia was a bit like a Stepford wife. They were perfect, too perfect. Marcia and I started going on little walks together. Of course, the girls were always with us. We visited all the parks, zoos, and other such attractions within a day's drive. The more time I spent with the girls, the more relaxed they became. Before I knew it, I was already looking forward to every opportunity to see them. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but one night, about 4 months later, I found myself in bed with her. When I replay the events of that night in my head, the same thing comes up. I did nothing to initiate it. She took the initiative and seemed to control everything: the place, the time, and what we did. I'm not complaining. It was the first time I got something without paying for it. I can't say it was wild, passionate sex, but it was real. After the first night, we started enjoying ourselves regularly. At least I was enjoying myself. I was never sure about her. Marcia had small breasts, and even after having 2 children, they remained quite lush. Of course, you have to remember that I'm not an expert on such things. She didn't shave like the girls in porn movies. Every time I watched her go to the bathroom naked, I was overcome with excitement. My life had suddenly taken a completely different turn, but something was wrong. To everyone's amazement, Marcia and I were married 2 months later. It was a small ceremony. My mom flew in from Florida to meet her sister-in-law, who I guess she was in no way expecting to receive. I paid for her ticket. Most of the people attending the wedding were from work. Marcia's mother, who lives in Mount Carmel, couldn't make it. I never met her or any of Marcia's other family members. She never talked about them. We found a small house to rent until I saved up 20% for a down payment. I've always been careful about finances. Marcia no longer needed to work and became a stay-at-home mom. We had sex regularly, which I always enjoyed. For some reason, Marcia always insisted that we use a condom. I had the perfect wife and 2 perfect daughters. It was like the Twilight Zone. After the first year, I assumed things would calm down, but they didn't. Every day was the same, and the longer it went on, the more paranoid I became. In the evenings, I would sit in silence and try to figure out what was wrong. The problem was that nothing was wrong. Marcia was a wonderful wife, a wonderful mother, and a wonderful partner. I began to think I was going crazy. I'm tangled up in my own thoughts and I can't stop. Why? Why is this happening to me? Why am I persistently destroying my life? The best part of the wedding was the time I spent with the girls. I think they enjoyed it as much as I did. I am a logical person. I like to analyze things and draw conclusions. It's my nature. There was no reason why I couldn't look at this situation and realize something. I wasn't going to turn into some annoying, nosy person, but I would have to start paying attention to things and figuring things out. I mentally made a list of questions that needed to be addressed. Why had I never met anyone from Marcia's family? What was she really doing visiting her mother in Mount Carmel several times a month? Why was the girl's father such a mysterious figure? I had one question to answer first. What did she keep in a small, locked folder on a shelf in her clothes closet? The only time I had seen her with it was when she was enrolling the girls in school. I didn't even know where she kept the key. Figuring out what was in the locked box would be my first step. It was a logical problem, a real-life logical problem. Suddenly, I found myself looking forward to something and not being paranoid. My attitude changed for the better. Marcia was always going to the hairdressers at Elegance Chic every Tuesday morning. It was a very expensive salon, but I never saw it reflected on the charge cards. I guessed she was paying in cash, but she never had much cash, and I never saw any evidence of unusual cash withdrawals. Of course, I had no idea how much a visit to the hairdresser should cost, so I had no point of reference. It just seemed odd. I pulled into the house mid-morning Tuesday morning with no problem. I waited until she left to go into the house. Standing in front of the closet, I began to worry that she might have a clue placed on or near the box. I thought about it for a few moments and then dismissed the thought. She was confident in her position in the house and that her box would not be disturbed. After all, I was a good guy. I was someone she could trust. I wouldn't pry under any circumstances. I carefully removed the box and started working on the lock. It was a simple flat key with very simple notches. It took less than 2 minutes to open it. Inside, I found her birth certificate. There was nothing special on it. She had also put our marriage certificate in the box. There were some newspaper clippings and a few pictures. One of them was of her high school graduation. She was as beautiful then as she is now. Her prom date looked familiar, but I couldn't recognize him. Last in the box were 2 birth certificates for the girls. Both were born at Pottsville Hospital, but the most interesting part was the father's name. Hamilton Ryder was listed as the father of both Brandy and Brenda. Now I recognize the guy in Marcia's graduation picture. Hamilton Ryder was a member of the state assembly and was selected to run for the next election to the United States House of Representatives. He was handsome and charismatic. All the women voters loved him and the men admired him. He had every chance of being elected. He was married to Emily Wilcox, the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the northeastern part of the state. Some people said that Hamilton's rise in the political world was due to the support he received from his father-in-law. Emily Wilcox was a paradox. Their marriage was an event, and at the time all the newspapers and magazines wrote about it. When they married, she was an unassuming, modest little thing. Over the years, she seemed to change, and not for the better. At one point, she dyed her hair blonde and started wearing it in styles that didn't seem to suit her. Her makeup gradually became too revealing. Too much blush, too much plucking, and too much lipstick. Worst of all, her outfits and breasts changed. She seemed to have gone from a regular one to a pair of grotesque double D. It was all a little sad. Her character didn't match her looks. I often wondered if she knew people were laughing behind her back. Of course, it was none of my business, so I didn't give it too much thought, until today. Marcia shouldn't notice that the box has been moved or opened. I was very careful. I really didn't believe she was referring to the box too often. From what I know now, I didn't understand why she would want it. In fact, it would have made more sense for her to keep the box at her mother's house. Now I knew a little more than I had before. Marcia had been friends with Hamilton Ryder since high school and was the mother of 2 of his children. Actually, there were only 2 because with Emily he didn't have any. It was interesting that Marcia had put his name on the birth certificates. Under the circumstances, it looked like something he wouldn't want to do. That evening, I was being a good husband as usual. I complimented my wife on her hair and asked the girls how school was going. For the first time, I felt fake. It was a game. Marcia knew what the game was and had been playing it for over a year. Since I was a beginner, I had to develop my own strategy. The word strategy alone implied that it would be long-term. I wasn't happy with that, but I didn't have a short-term tactical plan. That evening, while my Stepford family was watching TV, I ordered a bug GPS tracker on eBay for $139 with free shipping. I figured it would be interesting to see where Marcia was headed when she went to visit her mother. The new tracker will pair nicely with my Garmin GPS Map 60 CSX. It's going to be a lot of fun. As a protective measure, I opened several new bank accounts to protect my few assets. The next day, I quietly took 2 weeks sick leave. The company was more than happy for me to take it for monetary reasons. Marcia never made any friends at SSA, so I didn't have to worry about her finding out I wasn't at work. Later that morning, I stopped by Seymour Schlump's house. Seymour and I went to high school together. We were 2 outcast kids who had built a friendship on not being part of the crowd. Seymour had a law degree, but he didn't have a job. He was listed on state, county, and city lists, waiting for someone to die so that a vacancy could occur. In the meantime, he supported himself and his mother by doing mostly car title renewals and transfers. He also did notary work and wills. I needed legal advice, and Seymour was more than happy to help. We spent an hour together, and when I left, he was as excited as a child getting a new puppy. I drove towards Allentown and had lunch at McDonald's. There was free Wi-Fi, and I had my laptop. Within an hour, I had all sorts of data and information on Hamilton Ryder. Most of it was political rhetoric, but among it was information I could use. I also had a long list of addresses that I would need later. While surfing, I came across an advertisement for a traveling expo that was taking place in Philadelphia over the weekend. Marcia and the kids were going to visit her mom on Friday after school, and I thought the expo looked good. After dinner that night, I did something I had never done before. While Marcia took her evening shower, I took the liberty of looking in her purse. I had never considered violating her personal space like this before, but now we were playing a game. Everything looked normal, and I was about to close up when I suddenly noticed something. Marcia used tampons when she had her period, but at the very bottom of her purse was a small bag labeled Kotex. Like any normal man, I avoided picking it up. I picked it up and carefully opened it to reveal an old Nokia cell phone. It only took me a minute to realize that it was a prepaid phone with T-Mobile service. There was only one number in the call log. When I found the phone, it was turned off and I left it in the same condition. It wouldn't have been hard for me to figure out who the number belonged to. I think I already know. Seymour was in a good mood. There were several folders in a neat row on his desk. He seemed anxious for me to sit down and show me what he'd done. Dennis, I know you said you wanted a simple divorce, but under the circumstances, you have a pretty good case for an annulment. The nice thing about it is that Marcia won't be able to contest it, and there will be no division of property. Each of you will get what you brought to the marriage. Are you sure? It would make things a lot easier. And a lot faster. Seymour pushed the first folder aside. What else? I had no trouble getting copies of the girls' birth certificates. Legally, Hamilton Ryder owes you no favors for taking care of the girls. If the case had gone to court, we would have been defeated in the first 5 minutes. However, the court of public opinion will deal with it. I suggest you file a complaint against him and make sure the media is fully aware of it. That will be your responsibility. Why? I'm paying you. For legal services, Dennis. If I'm caught participating in a smear campaign, especially against a public official, my potential career as a lawyer will be over before it begins. Okay. What do I need to do? Everything is printed on this top sheet. Memorize the instructions carefully and then burn the paper. This is a joke, right? I heard a groan from the other end of the table. Yeah. I'm sorry, but I was just trying to make things a little easier. The next file was Hamilton's charge of alienation of affection. Seymour didn't feel this case would fly either, but it could be just as valuable as the previous one. The next claim was for the recovery of Marcia's living expenses for the past year. It had nothing to do with the girls or his paternity towards them. The last folder was not directly related to me, but was a motion to file charges against Hamilton Ryder for 6 different civil violations very remotely related to the situation. In one of them, Seymour actually charged Hamilton Ryder with prostitution. He claimed that Hamilton had forced Marcia to trade sex for room and board for himself and the girls. It was another protracted trial that he had absolutely no chance of winning, but he would get a lot of racy publicity. There were still a few holes to plug, including at least one example of evidence of a secret relationship between them. I hope to be done with that this weekend. Marcia was surprised to see me when I came home for lunch. I wanted to be there when the mail was delivered. She seemed glad for the company and made us grilled cheese sandwiches. I tried my best to make polite conversation until the mail arrived. She noticed the priority package and commented on it. I told her it was a removable hard drive I had ordered for backing up data on computers. She agreed with the answer and I left smiling. For the next hour, I spent the next hour carefully reading all the instructions on how to install and operate my new GPS tracker. This was going to be fun. I had planned it that way. That evening, Marcia seemed a little quieter than usual. Usually, when she returned from her visits to Mom, she was cheerful. Friday seemed very far away. I realized I couldn't pretend for that long. I decided that Tuesday morning, while the girls were at school and Marcia was at the beauty parlor, would be the best time to make my move. Monday was a pretty busy day. I took all the prepared envelopes from Seymour's office to the post office. The earliest they would be delivered would be Wednesday. I gave Seymour $5,000 to cover his fee and expenses. After reporting to work, I spent the rest of the morning closing out the accounts. One of the local tuxedo rentals was selling used outfits. Fortunately, I was able to find 2 that fit. Since I needed a place to store my new work clothes, I rented a cheap motel room for 4 nights. I drove past the house as Marcia was leaving. I had no idea where she was going, but I figured I'd take the opportunity. As I loaded all my stuff into the car, I realized that I didn't really have that much stuff. I felt a little sad as I drove down the street for the last time. I will miss family life even though it was a farce. The girls and I never seemed to fall in love, but I knew I would be thinking of them. It was a sad situation. I felt hurt and betrayed, but not enough to explode. The only way out for me was to quietly disappear. I rented a storage unit and paid for it a year in advance. Even though it was the smallest room, the amount of stuff I had looked pitiful. That night I went overboard at Taco Bell. I took every dish on the menu that I had never tried before. I can't explain why I did it, except that I felt a little reckless. Of course, most of the tray went in the trash. I couldn't bring myself to eat it all. Later, sitting alone in my room, I was beyond bored. Just out of a whim, I called British Air. A very kind young lady happily agreed to move my Friday reservation to Tuesday. Friday was the busiest day for airlines, and Tuesday was a bit slow. The next morning, Seymour drove me to the airport. He was going to keep the car while I was away. I signed over the title and told him he could sell it if he found a buyer. It was almost 15 years old, so we both laughed when I suggested it. Check-in went very smoothly, and then I found myself sitting on a long plastic bench watching the departure time change. I was totally surprised when my cell phone started buzzing. I had forgotten to turn it off. Dennis? Is that you? It's Brenda. I wasn't expecting any calls, much less one like this. Yes. Why are you calling? Brandy and I wanted to say goodbye. We were sorry when we found out you were gone. Brenda, is your mom there? No. She's in the bedroom. She's been there all morning. I didn't know what to say. Dennis? Yeah? Brandy and I wanted to tell you that we tried really hard not to be bad. Mom said it was very important. We weren't bad, were we, Dennis? No, Brenda. You and your sister have always been perfect angels. You've never done anything wrong. Then why did you leave? I'm sure your mother would rather explain it to you. Have you asked her? She's been lying in bed crying since yesterday. We had to make breakfast ourselves. I felt I should talk to Marcia, but under the circumstances it didn't seem like a good idea. Dennis, if Brandy and I did something wrong, we're sorry. Can you come home? I don't think so, dear. I need to get away for a while. I could hear her crying on the other end of the phone. I was looking for a way to end the conversation without acting like a complete jerk when they announced my flight was boarding. I have to go now. Take care of your sister and mom, okay? I turned the phone off before she could say anything else. Then I turned the phone off. I wouldn't need it for the next 6 months anyway. I found life on a cruise ship fascinating. I worked with one of the ship's engineers in the mornings and spent every evening dancing with enthusiastic ladies. Some of them were young, but most were older than my mother or older than me. Since I learned to dance with my mother, it made it much easier for me. I had a lot of fun. Most of them didn't speak English, so I didn't have much trouble communicating. I made do with a smile and the occasional peck on the cheek at the end of the dance. They all seemed to enjoy it. That all changed when I embarked on my 5th voyage. On the first day, I was informed that I would be dining at the captain's table that evening. Only high-ranking members of the crew could sit with the captain. I was at the bottom of the food chain, so my invitation was unusual. The only dress clothes I had were 2 tuxedos. I usually ate in the team dining room, and the clothes didn't matter. Since I had no idea about protocol and good table manners, I waited until everyone was seated before approaching. There was an empty chair waiting for me. I addressed the captain as I was supposed to and then cautiously sat down. I felt very uncomfortable, to say the least. I looked around the table, trying to figure out why I was here. To my left sat a large, sweaty man who seemed to be speaking Greek. To my right sat a well-dressed woman my age who seemed vaguely familiar. When I glanced in her direction, she smiled slightly and looked at me. I quickly averted my gaze. As the food was served, I tried to pay attention to what the guests were chatting about, but to no avail. I was already a poor conversationalist, and multiple languages didn't give me any confidence at all. This hellish dinner would be over soon. I kept telling myself that over and over again. When the dessert dish was brought to me, I felt a hand on my right arm. I turned my head and she spoke. Relax, Dennis. You look awfully tense. No one had ever introduced me, but she knew my name. I realized that must be the connection, the reason I was at the captain's table. Who was she? How did she know my name? What did she want? It wasn't mysterious and exciting. It was frightening and unnerving. The infernal meal will soon be over. The infernal meal will soon be over! When we finished, the guests began to go about their business. I was still sitting when the mystery woman took my hand and led me to one of the quieter areas of the bar. I followed her like a puppy following a dog, and I didn't know why. You have no idea who I am? I just nodded affirmatively. She laughed lightly. Imagine bleached blonde hair, lots of makeup, and big boobs. Oh my God. You're Dolly Parton. My failed attempt at a joke elicited a poke in the ribs and another small laugh, more like a giggle. You're not paying attention, Dennis. Think. I knew what the answer would be, but knowing that answer begged even more questions. Emily Ryder? She smiled at my answer. I prefer to use my maiden name. Okay, Emily Wilcox. Neither of us said anything as the cute little Thai waitress set out our drinks. Mrs. Wilcox. I realize we're related somehow, but I don't see how that could have caused you to be here. Don't make this any harder than it has to be, Dennis. I'm only here to thank you. You probably don't realize the impact you've had on my life. Absolutely not. I've never met you before or even seen you up close. Of course, you look quite different from before. Good or bad? Good. Good, no doubt about it. Thank you. It was mostly just hair and makeup. At this point, she caught me looking at her breasts, or what used to be her breasts. She couldn't help but laugh at my discomfort. The doctor put them in, the doctor took them out. I've never been so happy to be rid of those damn melons. They made me feel ugly. I didn't know what to say. Any comment would have sounded rude. She continued her explanation. I just replaced the double D's with small B's. It took a little work, but he paid well, and I'm happy. I think I blushed. There was a lull in the conversation, and we both took sips from our drinks. Oh, before I forget. I have something for you. Emily reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope folded in half to fit. She smiled as she held it out to me. It's an annulment of your marriage. Daddy managed to get it finalized without a problem. Not only are you not married, but you've never been married. Isn't that great? Her words were bittersweet. She seemed more pleased about the annulment than I was. It wasn't what I wanted, but what I thought I needed. I had gotten used to the idea of being married. I wanted to be married, but under different circumstances. I smiled weakly at Emily and said, "Thank you." Something you're not very happy about, Dennis. No. This whole situation has been a little painful for me. I waved for the waitress to bring 2 more drinks. I usually limit myself to 1 a night. I don't want to pry, but what is the status of your marriage? Are you divorced or are you going to be divorced? Emily Wilcox wrinkled her nose slightly, looked at her watch, and smiled again. Dennis, in exactly 22 minutes, I will be a widow. That was an interesting statement. I tried to think of a clever response, but nothing came out. The impact of her statement finally reached my brain, and I went numb. The waitress set down our drinks, and mine was downed in 1 gulp. Don't look so shocked. It was a compromise. What does that mean? In another 7 days, you were supposed to die in an automobile accident south of Pottsville. 2 days later, I was supposed to drown in a boat off Long Island. It was all planned. The conversation was no longer light and casual. My drinking companion was no longer smiling, and the whole tone had turned somber. I absorbed the few bits of information she'd just given me, and I started to feel nauseous. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Wilcox. I'm afraid the last drink was too much for me. Please excuse me. I stood up and started to leave the room. She didn't try to stop me. I did feel an upset stomach, but I don't think it was because of the drink. I didn't sleep well that night. Instead of eating with the team, I waited until the first breakfast and found Emily. She was sitting at a table alone, a luxury available only to the most affluent guests. The waiter recognized me in my work clothes, and we were met with a perplexed look. Emily nodded to indicate that everything was fine. She held out her full glass of orange juice to me across the table as a greeting. Are you a widow now? Emily handed me the telex that lay on the seat next to her. Kingston, Jamaica. Hamilton Ryder, a Pennsylvania politician, was killed today about 30 miles east of Montego Bay. No one else was injured in the accident? Mr. Ryder leaves a widow, Emily, but no children. Mrs. Ryder was not near her husband at the time of the accident. Hamilton Ryder was a candidate for a seat in the U.S. Senate until mysterious allegations of inappropriate behavior surfaced a few weeks ago. I flipped through the rest of the message and marveled at the effect my silly little mailing scheme had had. The waiter placed a small plate of fruit in front of me, which I began to eat. What's going to happen to Marcia and the girls? It's nothing, Dennis. She wasn't involved anymore. I guess you couldn't have known. What do you mean? Shortly before you left, you followed them to a cabin in the Pocono Mountains. Do you remember that? Of course. How do you know that? My father installed bugs in the cabin and Hamilton was constantly being watched. They used the same thing every time they met. You didn't stay long that day. Not long after you left, Hamilton and Marcia had a big fight about something he was planning. Marcia decided she didn't want anything to happen to you. Hamilton insisted that they stick to the original plan, which was to kill us both. She refused and ran out of the cabin. She spent the rest of the weekend with her sister in Frackville. Is that where the girls were? Yes. Where the hell is her mother? Marcia's mother is in a nursing home in Pottsville. Hamilton is paying her expenses. I finished the fruit and poured myself a cup of coffee from the carafe on the table. Why would he want to kill us? What did it get him? We were never sure, but it seems he was hoping to get sympathy votes because he was a grief-stricken widower. Besides, he would have inherited a hell of a lot of money. I think he was hoping to further elevate his position by marrying a widow with 2 little girls. Everything was planned to make him look good in front of the public. I think it's a stupid plan. What does he gain by killing me? Of course, I'm a little biased. We both laughed a little at my feeble attempt at black humor. Why did Marcia decide to abandon this plan? Dennis, you'll have to ask her, but I think she's starting to have feelings for you. She used me. From day one, I was just a tool for her. There's no way she had any feelings for me. Don't count on it. How do you know all this? My father has been following all of this for over a year now. Okay, but tell me again why you're here. My father is a very slow and meticulous man. We knew what was going on for a long time and realized we needed to get it over with. But according to him, the time was never right. I was tearing my hair out trying to figure out how to get him to do something. And then a knight on a white horse came to my rescue. Thank you, but that's not how I would describe myself. You still haven't answered my question. When you flooded the world with lawsuits and publicity, things fell into place quickly, very quickly. You pulled my father out of his dead ass and made me a happy woman. That wasn't my intention. I guess I wanted to get rid of a failed relationship and make my feelings known along the way. You've done well, Dennis. Very good. That's why I'm here. To thank you. I smiled and got up from my chair. I'm glad that's all sorted out. Now, if you'll excuse me because I have to get to work. I'm already late. Relax, Dennis. Your work schedule for the week has been changed. Dad talked to the captain, and for the next 7 days you'll be working just to keep me company. I shook my head in bewilderment and stepped back. I heard what she said, but I couldn't say I liked it. I didn't feel like spending the rest of the week entertaining a rich, spoiled brat. I had a job to do. Chief Daggert, my immediate supervisor, was no help. He sighed when he saw me and told me to go to the helm. I didn't see the captain, but the second mate informed me that everything Emily Wilcox had said was true. As I walked back to my cabin, I realized that I didn't have any clothes that matched what I was about to do. I had 2 used tuxedos, Dickie's work clothes, and the outfit I had boarded the ship in. I changed into the best shirt and pants I had and started looking for my new mistress. I found myself being used by a woman again, and I didn't like it. Was this really my destiny? Would I really spend the rest of my life as a whipping boy for dominant women? Maybe dominant is too strong a word. Either way, I wasn't happy. She was reading a pocketbook, sitting on the deck and sheltered from the wind. She smiled when I approached, but she looked worried. I'm sorry if I upset you, Dennis. It wasn't part of my plans. I had hoped you would take some satisfaction from the arrangements with the captain. Your reaction indicates that I was out of line. I sat down next to her and tried to get comfortable. I never liked chaise lounges. I was hoping we could come to some sort of compromise. I am willing to spend my days with you and will do my best to be a good companion, but I feel my evenings belong to the unaccompanied ladies on the cruise. Do you want to dance with them? Yes. There are a few other men here who do the same thing, but there are never enough for everyone. These women wait all day to dress up and go dancing. I can't let them down. Okay, I can agree to that with some restrictions. Between dances, you will sit with me, and I will choose the women you dance with. Why would you want to do that? I don't know, but let's try it tonight. If it doesn't work out, I'll give up on this venture. Okay, I'll give it a try. I don't understand why you want to do this, but I'll try. Good. We'll stop in Napoli this afternoon and I'll buy you clothes for the rest of the trip. I can afford it and I won't take no for an answer. Any questions? No. We both laughed when we realized that I had given her an answer that she said she didn't accept. The rest of the day passed merrily, but there weren't enough days left in the cruise for me to wear all the clothes she had bought me. Plus, there was no room in my stateroom to store them. Most of the shopping by necessity ended up in her room. Emily and I had dinner together, but not at the captain's table. After dinner, I changed into my black tuxedo for the evening. Emily had reserved a small table for two at the edge of the dance floor and was waiting for me. You look very elegant, Dennis. The tuxedo suits you. Thank you, but I feel out of place. You're looking at me. Do I look okay? You're just beautiful. I can't understand why Hamilton didn't appreciate what he had. I spent an hour in the ship's beauty parlor getting ready for tonight. I'm glad you think it was worth the time spent. The dress fits perfectly and emphasizes the pearls. I don't mean to be rude, but I think adjusting the bust line was a good decision. She leaned toward him and whispered, You shouldn't do remakes about women's breasts, Dennis. It's inappropriate. I whispered back to her, I'm sorry. I don't have much experience in this gigolo business. However, by necessity, I'm a quick learner. Some of these ladies are real coquettes. Before I made myself comfortable, I excused myself and walked over to the line of companion dancers standing near the stage. Most of them were older men who had been given free cruises in exchange for dancing with the guests for 6 hours a day. They all loved these evenings and enjoyed entertaining the ladies. They knew of my situation, but I still did not fail to tease them. Each of them promised to dance at least one dance with Emily that evening. Emily enjoyed the evening more than I could have expected. Every dance, she picked a different partner for me. The biggest problem was a German lady in a wheelchair. I didn't know how to handle her until the lady herself made a few suggestions. She was the only one I danced with twice. Emily danced several times, and several of them with other passengers. It was easy to see why. She stayed with me until the group had finished for the evening. I walked her to her quarters and was rewarded with a kiss on the cheek and a sincere thank you. It was a wonderful evening, it seemed to me. The week flew by. On the last night of the trip, Emily literally pulled me into her room and fiddled with me. I got the feeling that she was a little disappointed that I hadn't made an effort the previous nights. Her new breasts were still a little tender, but not enough to prevent her from enjoying my clumsy attempts to gently nuzzle her. For the first time in my life, sex seemed fun and relaxed. Emily and I seemed to move together and fit together perfectly. When I clumsily tried to open the condom packet, she grabbed it and threw it on the floor. I emptied myself into her 3 times before morning, including once in my mouth. She was compliant and coming violently. I was in 7th heaven. 4 hours later, she was about to fly home. She tried to convince me to go with her, but I didn't feel comfortable. I still had 4 months left on my contract. I promised to contact her as soon as I fulfilled my obligations. It was a small, stupid decision, but it was still important to me. For the next few weeks, I tried to convince myself that it was only because she was recovering from her spat with Hamilton. Sometimes I felt like a boor for taking advantage of a grieving widow. But then I remembered that she wasn't grieving, but rather celebrating. The more I thought about it, the more confused I became. Mornings were filled with daily safety reports and maintenance logs. Evenings were filled with dancing. I began to specialize in entertaining ladies with disabilities. The other escort dancers were more than happy to give me full latitude in this area, and the guests were delighted. Emily Wilcox hadn't sent a letter, email, or any other correspondence. I hadn't heard from Marcia either, but then she had no idea where I was. I started thinking about Brandy and Brenda a lot more often than I expected. I really missed them. I thought a lot about the situation Marcia had put us in. I understood the basic concept of what she and Hamilton were trying to do, but I never understood why they decided to do it. It was easy for my simple mind to explain it all away by telling myself that I just wasn't sophisticated enough to understand it. Only Marcia could answer all the questions. My contract was coming to an end. The cruise line wanted me to sign on for another 6 months with a small bonus. They also offered to send me to a maritime school in London so I could get certified in some areas related to the ship's electronic and safety systems. If I agreed to the training, I would commit to working for the company for a year. I promised to give them an answer within 30 days. I was flattered to learn that several lady guests had asked for dates when I would be on board so they could schedule their trips. Instead of flying home, I flew to Orlando. My mom shared a modular home near Ocala with a gentleman friend who turned out to be quite nice. My mom seemed genuinely upset that her marriage to Marcia had not worked out. When the plane landed in Philadelphia, my mood was subdued. Coming home wasn't something I was looking forward to, but it had to be done. It was time to clear the air with Seymour. I wanted to make sure I didn't owe him anything. I had nowhere to stay, no job prospects, and nothing to look forward to. It would have been so much easier if I had at least done a little bit of planning ahead of time. There had been plenty of time in the last few months to look online for a new job, or at least a new place to live, but I had no motivation. Most of the people getting off the plane in the terminal were alert and excited, but I was in a second group, businessmen who were returning home with droopy eyes and a bored expression. A whole chapter of my life had passed, and I had nothing to brag about but heartache. Watching other passengers being warmly greeted by their friends and families only added to my depression. All I could do was rent a car and head back to the source of my misery. Dennis! Dennis! The sound of my name being shouted by some kids caught my attention, but only until I remembered that there were over 200 people on the flight, and the odds of someone in the family on the flight having the same name as me were pretty high. I smiled at my gullibility and kept walking. Dennis! Dennis! It was happening again. This time I looked for the source and was surprised to see Brenda and Brandy running up to me. It didn't make sense. No one knew I was even on the airplane. Only a few seconds passed and they both started grabbing my arms. They had never acted like this before and it confused me. Marcia could explain it, I was sure. The only problem was that Marcia wasn't there, Emily was. Emily was waiting with a smile on her face. I set my bag down and we exchanged kisses on the cheeks, the way posh people do in movies but have never seen in real life. It seemed natural, and I didn't know what else was expected of me. We were walking towards the terminal exit when a guy came up to us and asked for my plane tickets. Emily nodded at me and I handed them to him. The limo was waiting at the curb. The two girls chatted the whole time. In fact, they talked more today than I'd ever heard them say before. I caught words like limo and Aunt Emily, but I couldn't form any complete sentences. When the limousine doors closed, it was very quiet. The hustle and bustle of the terminal was behind us. Welcome home, Dennis. Emily took my hand and smiled. I didn't have time to respond. Isn't this great, Dennis? Have you ever ridden in a limo? I couldn't make out which girl was speaking. I looked around and smiled. I really missed them. No, never. Brandy spoke again. Dennis, we're having a sister. I want to name her Brittany, but Brenda wants to name her Bethany. What do you think, Dennis? What do you want to name her? My head was spinning. A million questions were waiting to be answered, but I couldn't formulate any. The comment about the new sister began to get to me. Was Marcia pregnant, and if so, where was she? I paused and looked at Emily. She smiled and lowered her gaze to her belly. Although it was too early to feel anything, she placed my hand on her stomach. When Emily said no condom was needed, I assumed she was on some kind of birth control. Apparently, I was wrong. Dennis, are you happy to see us? Brenda tried to nudge me slightly to get my attention, but the limo seat was too far away. Yes. I've missed you both very much, and it's really good to see you. I was rewarded with 2 broad smiles and a squeeze of Emily's hand. Am I going to get some kind of explanation? Emily leaned over and kissed my cheek. Maybe, maybe not. I decided I didn't need it. Epilogue. Shortly after I left, Marcia contacted someone in the state's attorney's office. Although she agreed to testify against Hamilton, the case never went to trial. Hamilton Ryder's death put an end to the case. Either way, a zealous state employee felt Marcia should be punished, and she was the one who got the short end of the stick. She ended up getting 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit murder and several other equally ridiculous charges. Now an appeal is being filed to have it all overturned. Emily learned that Marcia's sister was unable to look after Brandy and Brenda and volunteered to fill in for her. Surprisingly enough, Emily and Marcia actually became friends. I'm currently living with Emily and the girls. As soon as Marcia gets out of jail, we're all going on a week-long cruise in the Mediterranean. I don't know how we'll sleep, but I'm sure Emily will surprise me. I have 2 new tuxedos. Oh yeah, I turned down the job.